You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. On today's programme, too hot to fly the firefighting planes. Evidence of the extreme conditions we'll increasingly face with wildfires across southern Europe and in the United States and South America. More heat waves, more droughts, more cyclones. A stark warning for the future of India. But is the world's third biggest emitter ready to play its part at COP26? And if we can do it, why can't everyone? The island off Northern Ireland that aims to be self-sufficient in renewable energy by the end of the decade. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show. The warning from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was stark and shocking. And we start today with evidence of just how severe the impact of climate change is right now. Well, in a moment, we'll look at what it could mean for India. But first, to the increasingly disturbing pattern of extreme wildfires across the world. And whilst there have always been wildfires, we know from the IPCC report that more extreme, extensive and destructive fires are the harsh reality of climate change. Well, wildfires in parts of Greece, including Evia Island near Athens, have been burning for days now, and there are increasing concerns about fires in Puglia, Calabria and Sicily in Italy. There's also the huge Dixie Fire in California and now fast-growing fires in several countries in South America, including Peru and Bolivia. Meanwhile, wildfires are still raging in parts of Siberia in Russia, and 4 people have died in wildfires in Algeria. Well, this is the scene from Bolivia, where fires have swept across the eastern lowlands in the department of Santa Cruz, an area known for its rich wildlife. This year, forest fires have consumed more than 360,000 acres in the area. And in Peru, fires have started in the city of Cusco in the Andes. Air Force helicopters have been called in to drop water over the fires that started on Thursday. In Russia, there have been 155 forest fires across a large area of Siberia. 2 villages have been evacuated and dozens more are threatened, while buildings and houses have been destroyed. In Greece, the Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has apologised for failures in tackling the wildfires that have burned across the country for days and approved a further €500 million for relief and compensation. Well, Sky's Michelle Clifford has the latest from Evia, the hard-hit island near Athens. And Michelle, the Prime Minister there has called this a natural disaster of unprecedented dimensions. How are attempts to control the fires there now faring?
They're still really difficult. A week on, the fires are still blazing in Greece and here on the island of Evia. We hear a constant stream of firefighting helicopters going overhead trying to douse the land with water. But there are incredibly high temperatures today, and that's made the task all the harder. Firefighters from other European nations and further afield have now come to Greece to help with the effort. But as you mentioned, the Greek Prime Minister has gone on television and he's apologised for some of the government failings in terms of the response. He also talked about a lack of being prepared for such a catastrophic situation. And he issued a warning saying that the climate crisis is knocking on the door of the entire planet. And I suppose, Anna, that is a reminder of what experts have been warning of for a very long time, that what we've seen in Europe over recent weeks, be it flooding or be it wildfires, extremes of weather and temperature are going to be more frequent in the future. And the warning is that governments and leaders really need to be prepared.
Michelle Clifford, thank you. Well, let's turn now to India, crucial in the story of climate change. Yesterday's IPCC report said the Indian subcontinent will face far more extreme weather and is likely to suffer from more severe heat stress and flooding. Soon to overtake China as the most populous nation, India is also the third biggest emitter on the planet, so must play a significant role if the world is to tackle the crisis. Well, the IPCC report says India will face more heat waves and humid heat stress will be more intense and frequent in this century than the last. The report also says that the decrease in rainfall from the south and southeast monsoon in recent decades is due to human activity, but that in the long term, the country will face more heavy monsoon rainfall. Now, the Indian Ocean is heating faster than other areas, and the sea level is rising at 3.7 millimetres every year. Now, that means extreme sea level events that used to take place once a century will now happen nearly every year. But India is not just a victim of climate change, it's a major emitter, and its future emissions will be a hotly contested part of any deal at COP26. Now, China overtook the US to become the world's biggest emitter in 2006. So India is now in third place and responsible for 7% of the world's CO2 emissions. India says Western developed nations must shoulder the greatest burden in reducing emissions and argues the IPCC report vindicates its position. Well, let's get a sense of the mood in Delhi. A crucial player at COP26, our India correspondent Neville Lazarus is in the Indian capital. So, Neville, what is the reaction to the IPCC report there in India? Has its stark warning had an impact on the country's willingness to make changes at COP26?
The report has been talked about in the newspapers, in television studios, on the news, but that's where it ends. There hasn't been much of reaction from the government. In fact, there's been very slow inclination of the speed and scope of the efforts from the government in terms of mitigating climate change. We've seen we just move from one catastrophe to the next. It's one cyclone to the flooding or to a massive heat wave or glacial sort of breaches which have killed hundreds of people. And so there hasn't been much effort from the government to show or to talk about it. We just move on from one catastrophe to the next, and we do have now a new minister who came in last month. He's a lawyer. He's an environmentalist. He's co-authored a book on environment. He has talked about decoupling emissions and economic progress, and we hope that there will be a change, but it has to be done really, really fast, and the scope has to be across this country, because we're dealing with a country which is almost 2,000 miles from north to south and east to west, with a really large and long coastal belt and coastal region where there are millions of people living, and each month they are being battered by some sort of climate change and environmental hazard.
Neville Lazarus, thanks very much indeed. In today's other climate news, 84% of people in Wales believe they need to make substantial lifestyle changes to address climate change. That's the finding of a new survey by the Welsh Government that showed only 15% of respondents thought climate change will affect their local area a great deal. That's in stark contrast to the latest IPCC report, which warns that rising sea levels will affect coastlines in Wales and lead to the significant relocation of communities there. Just 9% of small firms measure their carbon footprint, falling to just 5% for micro businesses. A new survey of members by the British Chambers of Commerce shows many smaller companies are struggling to get to grips with their own carbon emissions. A new service has been launched with O2 to help smaller firms get information about transitioning to net zero. And life-sized lion sculptures have appeared in London as part of a global art installation launched in support of conservation across the African continent. The sculptures aim to highlight the threats faced by lions, such as climate change, while raising funds for community conservation. Climate change is driving habitat loss and increasing droughts in countries like Kenya and Botswana, leading to conflict between humans and lions. Rathlin Island, 6 miles off the coast of Northern Ireland, wasn't connected to the electricity grid until 2007, but aims to produce its own wind and wave energy by the end of the decade. Residents say if it can be achieved at this remote location on the end of the grid, it can be achieved anywhere ahead of the target. Our senior island correspondent David Blevins reports from Rathlin Island.
It's the most northern part of Northern Ireland. And it's easy to see why Rathlin is concerned about the climate crisis. The island wasn't connected to the grid until 2007, but aims to be carbon neutral by the end of this decade.
There's great possibilities now with hydrogen-fueled ferries, and we can produce hydrogen on Rathlin. So, I mean, that achieves two goals. It reduces our carbon footprint, hopefully to zero, but it also gives us some security in that we're generating our own energy and retailing our own energy.
Kate Burns is an underwater farmer. She's battling climate change by harnessing the potential in seaweed. These seas are swimming in kelp, and it's as rich in protein as beef.
There is as much protein in kelp, and also it's higher in calcium and iron than any other vegetable, including spinach. And you know, the thing about kelp is you grow it in the sea, you don't need any fertilizers or any pesticides or any herbicides. In fact, the more you grow, the better it is for the environment.
Tom's passion for wildlife photography has taken him around the world, but he keeps coming home to Rathlin and wants to see his subjects protected.
There has to be a change at some stage, and we need to do it sooner rather than later, because, I mean, you just see with the news, with the fires in the world and the heating up of things, possibly sea temperatures rising, you know, it's not looking too good at the minute.
You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment, but islanders want others to share their aspiration for carbon neutrality. They say if it can be achieved here, at the end of the grid, it can be achieved anywhere. Residents are deeply conscious that they share this island and the waters around it, and are fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. David Blevins, Sky News on Rathlin Island.
Rewilding is a word we hear more and more. It's a simple concept, but could play a crucial part in tackling both climate change and the biodiversity crisis we now face. A new 4-year project has just been launched to discover the best way to restore woodland and meadow habitats in the UK. Well, that's everything from us for today. Coming up on tomorrow's show, why climate change is putting the ancient world at risk of disappearing. You can catch that at the same time here on Sky News. See you then.